Hey, can you control this for a second? Oh man, I made it stiff. There we go.
Maybe. What am I doing?
Just put it on me.
Good evening, everybody. Your Vice President, Steve Coxon. As such, am the speaker chair. Tonight's speaker really needs no introduction, but maybe we have a new person here, so we'll give him an introduction. Mike Hellweg's a very long-time ASSI member. He has written almost 400 articles, and given more than 400 presentations. That's a lot. And he has two books, one on live foods for reptiles, which is currently available. One of the best books I've ever read, not just in the fish hobby, but I'm a professor, I review textbooks and all kinds of other books all the time, is Mike's live food book that is not currently easily available. You can spend several $100s to buy a used copy on Amazon and other sites, but he gives that live food talk as well. I've seen the live Betta, hopefully they're live, the wild Betta talk too, but the live foods book, I hope that Mike gets it out again before too long. I keep asking him how the progress is going. He always has a slight update, but I don't have a book in my hands yet. But it is one of the best written and researched books. It is got the research backing of an academic textbook, but it's actually very readable. And I know this only because I got it through interlibrary loan, which is a way that you can do it. It's not hard to do, actually. Get on the library website, navigate your way to interlibrary loan. Less than a week later, they'll have it in, and you get to keep it for a very short period of time, though, not like a regular library book. So I've had it out twice. It's truly excellent. I got to see Mike's wild Betta talk sometime during the pandemic. I think it was on Zoom. But that was it?
It probably was.
Yeah. And that gave me the bug for wild type bettas. I have half a dozen-ish species now. I've bapped 2 of them so far. Hoping to get the other. How many are there?
About 70.
About 70. Yeah, I probably won't find all of them. But anyway, Mike has just tremendous background knowledge, and really appreciate you stepping in to speak tonight. We had another speaker that canceled. Mike is kind of my go-to because he's got so many presentations that are so good at the ready and is always willing. Anyway, thank you very much, Mike. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Steve. All right, for those of you who are expecting Rodent tonight, you may notice that I don't quite look like him, and that doesn't look like Olympia. So we're going to talk about wild bettas tonight. And when I mention wild bettas, well, I guess first of all, when I mention bettas, most people probably think of Betta splendens. And most people probably assume that most bettas are bubble nesters, because when I got started in the hobby, that's what bettas were. They were Betta splendens, and they were bubble nesters. And one of the guys in our club, Fred Cottrell, got these Betta picta, and they were a Mouthbrooder, just like the cichlids from West Africa, or from East Africa. And I was hooked on them from that point on. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So first thing I always like to do is I'd like to thank all of the people that helped me, because I am a terrible photographer, as you will see. And I have some of Gary Lang's excellent shots in here, and I've also got some great shots from Ted Judy. And there are also several shots here from the IBC, which is the International Betta Congress, their species maintenance program, which I, along with Gerald Griffith and Ralph Tran, put together right around the turn of the century. And it's still going strong. None of us are in the IBC. Well, Gerald Lane's still, but the rest of us aren't still in the IBC because they like to focus on the fancy bettas. So if you came listening or hoping to listen about fancy bettas, I will just show you a picture in passing, but that'll be it. If you are interested in bettas, if this does kind of spark your interest, do think about joining the International Betta Congress. It's only $20 a year. And they have a species maintenance program, and all of these bettas that I'm going to talk about tonight are part of that species maintenance program. Unfortunately, most of them are not in the hobby right now, so we're going to try an import, actually. I had an old Betta supplier who retired, which was just perfect timing because it was like right before this, Steve asked me to do this. So I've got a new Betta supplier, and I've got a list of Bettas that he has available, and also some other anabantoids. So if anybody's interested, afterwards you can come up, take a look at it, and I'll be doing an order probably, I'll do it next week, and it'll probably get here about the middle to the end of October. So anyway, we'll talk about, first of all, about what affects all Bettas. So we've got what I call my universal Betta notes. And the first thing is that everybody always calls them anabantids, and they're not anabantids, they're anabantoids. Anabantids are actually a small group of air-breathing fishes from Africa. All of these fish come from, the anabantoids come from Southeast Asia. They're all in one genus, and basically they're what I would call a lie-in-wait predator. They pretty much hang around, they don't do a lot of swimming, they wait for food to come by or land on the surface, and then they strike it, and then they go back to hanging around waiting for something to come around to get to eat. And some of them will actually chase small fish or shrimp or something like that, but most of them just kind of spend their day just kind of taking it easy laying around. The other thing is they're all freshwater fish, and every single species except for one, which we'll talk about at the end, are found in freshwater in Southeast Asia. And most people think, oh, the anabantoids in general and bettas in particular, they got to have really warm water. Well, they actually don't. And if you get much above 83, 84 degrees, they actually stop reproducing because it's getting too hot. So you want to keep them 78 to 80 degrees for the bubble nesters, maybe as much as 82. And then the mouthbrooders actually can take temperatures down into the 60s without much trouble or anything like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get to each different species. And then the other thing is that I learned this the hard way, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Many years ago, back in the early to mid 90s, I don't even remember when it was, but Gary Lang and I bought a dozen Betta Belonga, and we split them up. And I was so excited about them, and I put them in a 10-gallon tank, and I was feeding the fish, and I got a phone call, and got distracted, and I went to work. And I came home that night, and all 6 of my Betta Belonga were lined up on the floor all the way across the room from where they had jumped out of the tank. So kind of a reminder that Bettas are excellent jumpers. Even Betta splendens will jump. And I've seen people try to set up these like stair step or waterfall displays of male Bettas in shows and stuff like that. And within 10 or 15 minutes of them putting all the Bettas in there, they're all in the container at the bottom. So they are excellent jumpers, and they will jump if you give them the opportunity. And of course, any fish that's been around for a while, or any group of fish that's been around for a while, there are all kinds of myths. And of course, the biggest one is that it actually started in the 1950s, and it started in a German magazine called Dots. And an American publisher who's just getting started in the business read this article that the gentleman wrote. And the gentleman was actually breeding blue gouramis, and he was speculating why all of his blue gouramis were dying, all his baby blue gouramis. And he was thinking, well, maybe it's because I didn't feed them enough, or maybe it's because they were too cramped, or maybe it's because the air was kind of cold over the top. And this was in Germany back in the early 1950s, and it wasn't it was still reconstructing from World War II. So there wasn't a lot of indoor heating and stuff at that point in time. And he was figuring, well, maybe it's because of the cold air that was over the top of the water. But he didn't really know. But if you actually read the article, he was only feeding, blue gouramis have about 1,000 to 1,500 fry. And he was only feeding enough food for about 10 or 15 fry. So what was actually happening was his fry were starving to death. And he just was speculating. But the American publisher read that article, and he focused in on the cold air over the top. In every book that was published by his company for the next 50 years, and actually up until the publishing, they stopped publishing books, and in their magazine as well, they always had a disclaimer that you had to have warm, moist air over the top of the tank, otherwise your fish would get pneumonia and they would die. Well, Dr. Gene Lucas did a lot of work, a lot of research with that. He was like the Betta guru. He worked at university, and he did over 1,000 spawns of bettas over 35 years. And he did them with cold air, warm air, and doing all kinds of tests and stuff like that. And me, myself, I've even had antibiotics spawn outside when I kind of forgot to bring them in, and they were sitting in a tub outside. And it got to be Thanksgiving weekend, and I finally had some time off to bring them in. And they were spawning still out there in St. Louis in November. So they don't need to have warm air over the top. Cool air is not a problem. And then the other thing is, especially the Europeans, when they translate into English, they call all members of the genus Betta fighting fish. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Most bettas are not very aggressive. They do have a little individual personalities and stuff like that. But when you think of Betta splendens and having the fighting and everything like that, that's one species out of an entire big genus. And those are pretty much the only ones that are really super aggressive. And then the other big myth is that you can't keep them in groups. I have kept most of these species in groups of half dozen to maybe 10 or 12 adults, and actually found that I've had better success with bigger groups than when I start out with just a pair. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get to the individual species. And then a lot of the species are threatened. You may recognize the Cares logo, and not exactly the sharpest logo, but that's the best one that Claudia sent me. So many of the species are threatened, but the aquarium hobby is one of these, like we all walk around targets, and it's our fault that they're threatened. But what's actually happening is that somebody got the great idea that we can make green fuel, and we can do that with coconut palm oil. And so in Southeast Asia, where the coconut palms grow very well, they started tearing down millions and millions of square hectares of forest. And they're tearing that down, and they're putting in all these palm oil plantations for this green energy. And at the same time, it's destroying the habitat of everything from our beloved fish to orangutans and everything in between. And it's actually not a very good fuel either. It's not a very energy efficient fuel. So it's kind of it's kind of a waste, I guess, is what you would call it. And then in other places, people are just expanding towns and stuff like that and dumping sewage right into the creeks and stuff. And that's what's actually destroying the habitat and wiping out these species, not us. So, and then some of you may be wondering why I keep saying the word Betta. I know a lot of people these days use the word beta. It is actually Betta, and the gentleman who described the genus, Charles Tate Reagan, he gave the genus its name in 1909. And he said that he was naming it after a group of legendary Thai warriors called the Betta. And the name kind of stuck, because he was describing, the first species he described was Betta splendens, which was a fighter. So he wanted to kind of name these legendary fighters after him. Beta is the second letter of the Greek alphabet. And it's also one of the kind of tests that software users use, which is probably why we've all become so familiar with the word beta. Beta, not beta, I got corrected on this, is also a plant genus, B-E-T-A. It is the common beet for Swiss chard, depending on whether you're growing it for the root or you're growing it for the
There used to be a VHS tape that they called Beta.
Hmm?
Big VHS tapes.
Yeah, VHS tapes, or not the other ones, the smaller ones.
Betamax.
Betamax.
Beta.
No, Betamax were the small ones. I use those for film cameras and stuff like that mostly. But anyway, that's why most people, I think, have become familiar with the word beta, even though it should be pronounced beta, but anyway. Never mind. Just my little thing thrown out there. It's a little pet peeve of mine. So currently there are 76 species in the genus as of this afternoon. I went through and counted them all on the Cal Academy website. They range from small mouthbrooders and small bubble nesters to fairly large fish, and we'll look at some of each of those as we're going along here. And they all come from this area in the red circle here. Basically, Indonesia and up into Southeast Asia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and they are found in all kinds of different habitats, from roadside ditches to small flowing streams. As you can see, this young man standing in the water. It looks like it's kind of solid, but it's actually that's actually water right there. And then this is actually water right here too. But that's the kind of places that most of the bettas are found in. And then you'll see when you start doing a lot of research online, most people divide them up into two groups, and then they'll divide them up even further by what they call species groups. But those have changed considerably over the last 30 years. So I don't use those. I use a little bit simpler breakdown. I use the bubble nesters. Like this is male Betta Persephone here, and he's tending his nest up here, and I'll show you a better picture of that nest in a few minutes. This is a tiny little guy, and this is one of those little Betta logs, floating Betta logs. And then this is a small mouthbrooder, Betta chinoides, Judy's photo. You can see how big the eggs are in relation to this guy, how many eggs he's got tucked into his mouth there. And then I'll talk a little bit about spawning, kind of generalize the spawning of the two groups, and then we'll look at some of the species of each of them. And hopefully, like I inspired Steve, I'll get you guys a little bit excited about some of them. So for the bubble nesters, you can use a 5 to 10 gallon tank for the smaller ones. And you only want to fill it with water about 6 inches deep. And the reason you want to do that is not because you're worried about the fish having cold air over the top or anything like that. The reason you're doing that is so that the eggs don't fall as far when they spawn, because they'll do their little spawning embrace, and the eggs will start to fall to the bottom, so the male doesn't have to go that far to collect them. Then he brings them up to the top and spits them into the nest. In some species, the females will help do that. In other species, the females just kind of wait for them to come back. So it just depends. And then if you've got some of the bigger bubble nesters, like the ones in the Bellica group, those guys need a bigger tank, like a 20 long or maybe even a 30 long or something like that. And then most of these guys, soft, slightly acidic water. You don't have to go crazy with that. I've seen a lot of stuff online where you got to have super black water and all that kind of stuff for them. They like that, but they don't need that. They are able to, in the wild, they're able to utilize those habitats which other fish can't use, because there's no oxygen in there, and because the water is very soft and very acidic, and they can tolerate that. But they don't have to have that. And something right around 80 degrees seems to be the optimal temperature, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, 78 to 82. But you don't have to go crazy on that either. And then floating plants are good because the male needs a place where he can anchor his nest as he's trying to build it. And otherwise, it just kind of, every time he goes and does the spawning embrace with the female, it kind of falls apart. But if it's got structure around it, it works a lot better. In the old days, we used to take those styrofoam coffee cups and cut them in half, and then float that in the tank, and the male would use that to build his nest under. But of course, we were just working with Betta splendens at that time. The other thing is we got to give the females. A lot of these guys, once they're done, they go into protection mode, and they will start trying to protect the nest and drive the female away. And if you got a bare tank, the female won't have any place to hide. And he'll just the male will be all stressed out because he's trying to keep the female away. And in some species, like Betta splendens, he'll actually kill the female. So you want to make sure that she's got some place to hide to get out of his line of sight. And as soon as she's down on the bottom after the spawning, it's over. You can take her out of the tank right away. And then kind of talk a little bit about strategy for success. This is one of the bettas I worked with and bred 88, 89, somewhere around there. I was working with blue double tails. This is a female here. So I've had a little experience spawning these guys. Easiest way to do it is to get your tank ready, get your 6 inches of water or so, add your conditioned male, and everybody knows what conditioning is, so I don't have to kind of make sure you separate them, feed them real good for a week or so with live foods and frozen foods and stuff like that. Then you take your conditioned male, you put him in the tank, and you let him get used to it. And then I found that these things are really good. I've still got one that I bought back in the 80s, and I still use it. It's kind of hard to see probably with this picture, but it's a hurricane lantern. It's just a glass, so it's open on the top and on the bottom. And you can set that in the tank, and then you put the female in there. And as soon as the male sees the female and he gets all excited and he's ready to go, he starts building the nest, and he'll just build this big nest, and he'll keep building the nest. And then when he stops building the nest, when he starts going over to the female and kind of displaying around the jar, then you know it's time. You can go ahead and take the jar out of there and let them spawn. And the other way you can tell with a lot of the wild type or wild appearing Betta splendens, which are getting harder and harder to find, females actually get a couple of stripes on the body here when she's ready to spawn. That's kind of her signal for the male. Nowadays, because as you can see, like with this one, even 30-some years ago, female's got this nice color to her, but you can't see the stripes. So what you can see is this little white nub down here. That's actually her breeding tube, and that's kind of lets you know that she is ready to go. If you don't see the breeding tube, she's not ready to spawn yet. And you can see that in all the different species, not just splendens. So this is your picture of splendens for today. So, and then the other thing that you want to do is you want to kind of keep an eye on it. You don't want to just walk away and leave them, because as soon as the spawning is done, like I said, when the female's down at the bottom or trying to hide, then you can remove her. And then this is that bubble nest I was showing you earlier from the bottom of the male Persephone. You can see here are the eggs just floating in there. Not a whole lot of eggs, but this is in the hole that's on the top of the floating bed alone. And then this is Gary's shot. This is actually a different anabantoid. This is I think it was Dei. Yeah, it was Dei. Pseudopsis flaninus Dei. And the reason I love this shot is because you can see anabantoids do this thing where a few of the fry will grow faster and others grow slower. So you can see there's still some hanging in the nest up here. There's some that have kind of started to venture out of the nest, and they're kind of still hanging. They're not quite free swimming yet. And they have a little sticky gland on their head that allows them to kind of stick to things for the first few days. And they can stay up near the surface that way. And then you can see there's actually some that are free swimming already. And what will happen over the next week or a couple of weeks is these little guys here that are bigger will start growing faster and faster. And what happens in the wild is they actually grow big enough that within a couple of weeks, because there's not a whole lot of food in their environment, they've got a bunch of siblings that are coming up behind them that are smaller, and they'll eat all those siblings. So if you're raising them and you start seeing some tearaways like that, you want to make sure that you take and pull them out after about 2 weeks and move them to another tank so that the smaller fry will have a better chance of growing. And then also to kind of address that, you can feed them all baby brine shrimp right from the start. But what I found is that I get a better growth rate and a little bit more even growth weight if I use something like Infusorium. And this is Charles Harrison's Infusorium photo here. You can see all the different sized critters from different types of ciliates and different rotifers and all different kinds and different types of movement and stuff like that. So that even the smallest fry will be able to find something in there. And even if they're not quite big enough to eat a lot of brine shrimp, they can eat a lot of the smaller stuff. And then you feed that for just a few days, and then you can start going on to brine shrimp. A lot of times what I'll do with, especially with some of the wild species, is start out the fry with the San Francisco strain of brine shrimp. Those fry are nauplii are a little bit smaller than the ones that come from the Great Salt Lake in Utah. But the ones from the Great Salt Lake in Utah are much, much, much less expensive. So I only use the San Francisco strain for 2 or 3 days until everybody seems to have caught up with that, and then I start feeding the Great Salt Lake strain, which is a little bit bigger and a whole lot cheaper. And then basically from that point on, you feed them fairly heavily with that. And after about 3 or 4 weeks of live foods, you can start feeding them ground up flake food and fine pellets and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the bubble nesting species. You have the Bellica group. Bellica means warlike, and that was also described by Reagan, and he was kind of going on the fighter mentality. But these guys, they are aggressive, or slightly aggressive, but they're not super aggressive. You can keep these guys in groups. Actually, I found that they do better when they're kept in groups. And you've got 2 species in the group right now, plus a couple of locations that actually might wind up being species, separate species on their own. And as I mentioned before, this is one of my photos of a pair of the Betta Samorum, so you can see why I use other people's photos as much as I can. Of course, it might just be the equipment too, because Gary came over and he let me borrow his camera. Was it Bertha? Yeah.
That was 35 millimeters. So.
Yeah, way big when I took this, a couple of these pictures here. So, yeah.
When you have them in a group like that and they're bubble nesters, do you have to separate them when they bubble nest, or you just put them in a long enough tank?
Well, I'm just getting to that right now.
Okay.
We'll talk about the coquina group. It kind of gives you an idea. It's a little bit better example, but it's pretty much the same for all of them.
Is that Betta Vertigala?
What's that?
Is that Betta Vertigala then?
No, this is Betta coquina. So, and the reason, or the way you can tell Betta coquina from all the other wine red bettas, because a lot of them kind of look alike, is that the males have this green spot most of the time. But in a single spawn, you'll have males that have the green spot on both sides. You'll have males that have it on one side. You'll have males that don't have any green spots at all. So, but the way to tell this species is they've got black tips to their anal fin, to the back of the anal fin, and to their pelvic fins. The other ones have white or yellow. But the other thing is with these guys, the females do this almost headstanding thing. That's a normal posture for the female. The males are usually fairly level and straight like that. But all of these guys are fairly heavily endangered in the wild. Coquina seems to be pretty widespread, and you see them fairly often available for sale. These are some of the other species. There are still more in the group, but these are some of the other species here. The only one that I've not had really good success with is bettas, and those guys do seem to be a little bit more aggressive to the point where if you've only got a couple of them, for whatever reason, you wind up with one male within a few days. So, a lesson learned on those guys. I haven't seen them again since I got them that time, but I've heard that from other guys who've got them too. Betta livida is a nice, pretty relaxed one. You can see Betta rudolens here has this beautiful, bright red color. And I'll show you another one in a little bit that's got that beautiful, bright red color too. And the only difference really is the eye color. And that's how they're differentiating the species on that one. These guys, they call the Batman Betta. And for those of you who are around in the 60s or who saw the Batman series from the 60s, Batman's uniform was kind of a grayish black and blue. And these guys have blue fins on a black body. So that was the interesting name that some wholesaler came up with when they called them the Batman Betta. They're really cute. They're only about an inch and a quarter or so long. And like I was showing you before, that picture of the male guarding the eggs inside the floating log. And then this is Betta vertigala here. This is another really tiny one. It may actually not be a Betta species. Nobody's really looked at the genetics, but looking at the morphology, they have twice as many rays in the dorsal fin and the anal fin, and you can't see it in this picture, but the vertebrae inside, they actually have 2 more vertebrae than normal Bettas do. So they may or may not actually wind up being in a different genus at some point.
I did those years.
What's that?
I said I did those years.
I know you did. I did too. I actually got one from you. So, these guys are a colony spawner. I actually kept them going for several years in a 20-gallon long, keeping them as a group. And the males with these guys and with some of the coquina, what they do is they build these really tiny nests, and they kind of hide them. So you may or may not know that they've got the nest there. And like when I first spawned those coquina, I got all excited. I called Gary up and he came over to take pictures because the male had built the nest right in the front corner, right there. Perfect for pictures. And he was displaying under it and kind of guarding the nest and everything like that. And Gary got there and the nest was gone. That that happens. So that's why he let me play around with the camera, I guess. But what happened was, the male, which I found out later, was that the male had taken the nest and moved it. And he built another nest and moved all the eggs, and then he did it again, and he did it again. And there were 3 other males in the tank with him, and they started building nests, and then they started moving them around. And I figured, well, I guess that's pretty normal for those guys. And then with the other species that I spawned in the group, they've all done the same thing too. So it's kind of annoying, but sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 males guarding their nest at the same time and moving them around. But if you think about that for
Their nest is not at the top of the water either.
no, they usually build them down a little bit lower, like in caves or under plant leaves or something like that. So it just probably when we start thinking about where did mouthbrooding come from, that's probably the group that mouthbrooding first came from. And we'll talk about another species in just a minute here. But kind of a logical step where the male's taking the eggs into his mouth and then taking the fry into his mouth and moving them around. From that to the male just keeping the eggs and the fry in his mouth all the time, kind of a logical progression. Then you got the splendens group. Unfortunately, it's very, very hard to find wild Betta splendens now. And the reason for that is because of Betta fighting. The cultural, I guess, it's really popular.
They thought there was like people here used to dogs.
Well, yeah, it's like people that used to do chickens and dogs and stuff like that. They fight Bettas over there, which I guess is more humane and less bloody than, because as soon as the male stops fighting, the fight's over. So you just take him out. And what happened a lot was if you didn't have a good fighter, you just threw it in the creek and you started working with some other ones. And that kind of made Betta splendens much more widespread than it actually probably was originally. And the other thing with Betta splendens is that it likes to reproduce with basically anything that blows or that knows what a bubble nest is, so that the male gets the bubble nest and he'll spawn with the female splendens or a female bettas, or even, which kind of surprised was female smart Nina too. So you've got 3 different species here. The easiest way to tell them apart is Betta splendens. The red color goes all the way through the caudal fin, so it doesn't just stay at the edge. If you see it just on the edge like this, it's a Betta embellus population. And these guys are really peaceful. They're like the coquina group. They don't fight at all. Betta smart Nina. I've kept them a couple of times. I've kept them with pairs, and every time I wind up with just a male. They are pretty nasty. But you can keep them in groups, and the males kind of scrap a little bit, but they don't really kill each other. So keeping them in groups seems to be the best way to go with them. And if you see the little green spots all over the body like this, they've actually started breeding those into fancy bettas, splendens, and the ones that are out there that are hybrids. And they started calling them alien bettas. And you'll see those on the internet all the time, and they're just absolutely gorgeous fish. Unfortunately, if you get them and breed them, you can't turn them in for BAP because they are a hybrid. But they are really, really cool fish. And then I talked about the evolution from bubble nesting to going to becoming a mouthbrooder. And that's the species here, Betta brownorum. This is the male in the background, the female up here. As you can see, they both have spots. Again, sometimes only the male has spot. Sometimes they'll only have them on one side. Sometimes from the same spawn, you'll have some fry that have spots, some fry that don't. And this one, the females also have spots, so it doesn't really help you a whole lot. But what you can tell is the male's got a bigger dorsal fin. He's got more intense color. Female always carries her fin, her dorsal fin erect. The males generally keep them laying on their back. They only hold them up like this when they're starting to notice a girl and kind of showing off for her, or they're fighting with another male, kind of displaying for another male. And you can see these guys have a few nips out of their fins and stuff like that, but not too much damage done. These guys, I've had a male, the same male, build a nest, then build a nest and move it around, and then another time when he spawned, there was no nest. He just went right to holding the eggs in his mouth and then the fry. He didn't hold them as long as some of the mouthbrooders. A lot of the mouthbrooders will hold for up to 20 days. He only held them for about a week. But so you can see that's kind of the evolutionary chain there. But that does lead us into mouthbrooding. And this is the larger group of bettas. In the past, like I mentioned, most people, when we talk about bettas, everybody just assumed they were all bubble nesters. In fact, there was a book that was published, it was all about the bubble nesters. Anabantoids, they're all bubble nesters. Well, it turns out most anabantoids are mouthbrooders, not bubble nesters. And you can see that really well in the genus Betta. So, Betta mouthbrooders, probably close to 70 species, maybe a few more than that. There are so many different populations, and we all talk about, or we all, meaning Betta people, we talk about the different populations and trying to keep them separate. And some of the killie guys will tell you that too. You always want to keep the population separate. We always tease them about the Kiongo police station and all that, different names for the places where they were collected. But I'll show you in just a minute why you want to do that. Because a lot of times the populations, when they start looking at them a little closer, turn out to be different species. So you may be calling it one thing and assume that it's that species, and you drop the location name, and then later on you try to find a female for the group or a male for the group or something like that, and you get a different looking fish that's not the same, and you don't remember what the location name was. It turns out it was a different species from what you're looking for. So you always want to kind of keep that in mind. And then so far, of all the species, and all but about 5 species of the mouthbrooders have been bred in the hobby, and all of them are paternal mouthbrooders. That means the male carries the eggs. So in this case, the females are the ones that are a little bit more aggressive. The females are the ones who are basically in charge, not the males. So I guess you could call these the feminist bettas too. So a lot of the males will carry the eggs for just about 2 weeks. And I'll talk about something else that they do, which I've noticed in several species now. And if you read the article in the Darter, I also mentioned it in there. But it's a reason to have those floating logs in the tank. And that's because after, I've talked to, I don't know how many betta breeders that have said the same thing. After 3 days, the male's out eating. Well, the males do that. And some of the males will actually eat every couple of days, the entire time they're carrying the fry. And after about the 3rd day, though, what they do is they will go someplace hidden. One of those betta logs is perfect. And they'll go in there and they'll spit out all their eggs. They'll go out and eat. And they come back and they pick up all the good eggs and they leave the fungus eggs. And then some of them will hold for the rest of the 2 weeks or 20 days or whatever without releasing the eggs again. And sometimes you'll see them, you put food in there, and if it's looking good or if they're hungry enough, they'll go ahead and they'll eat it. Sometimes they'll eat with the eggs in their mouth, sometimes they won't. Sometimes, I guess they go and spit them again. I've never seen them spit a second time, but they do that. And I've seen that in several species now. I've personally witnessed it, so I think it's fairly common among the mouthbrooders. And then the great thing about these guys, the fry are big enough for baby Rhine shrimp right away. They're about the size of baby guppies, so you don't have to do anything special with them. They go right to the bottom though. You think most anabantoids, you think air breathers, they go to the surface. Well, the mouthbrooder fry always go to the bottom. So I've always got like lots of cover on the bottom. We've got leaves, little pieces of twigs and bark and branches. And I also take coconuts and cut them up into small pieces and create all kinds of little caves that lay all over the bottom and stuff like that, just to give them a little place to hide just in case. Not all of the adults will eat the fry, but in a few species, the adults are really good fry predators. So, as I mentioned before, the females are aggressive. In some species, the females are very aggressive. I think the male Betta splendens aggressive. So they're basically defending their territory, and they're trying to chase the other females away. And if they're spawning with a male, they'll chase the other males away. And then if they get done spawning with that male and they still got eggs left and he won't take any more eggs into his mouth, she'll chase him away and go out and court another male, bring him back to the cave, and then start spawning with him. And I've had a female that I watched spawn with 4 different males over the course of about an hour, and until she was finally done. So, the other thing is, the way I like to keep these guys, like I mentioned before, I like to keep them in groups. And I like to keep the Mouthbrooders in groups with multiple males and maybe 1 female if you've only got a couple, or if you've got a bigger size group like 8 or 10 fish. I like to have like 2 or 3 females. Usually try to keep an odd number of females so that if 2 of them are fighting, the 3rd one still has the energy to go spawn and not be bothered by the other 2 that are fighting. So just kind of think in odd numbers with them. And then kind of a strategy for success. Like I said, these guys are a little bit bigger. The smallest species you can do in a 10-gallon tank with a group of a half a dozen or so. The larger ones you want to keep in like a 20 long or 30 long or something like that. Generally cooler water. Again, you're thinking this is against what you're thinking when you think of the anabantoids. But I've had them spawn, Betta NSA in particular, spawn in water that was only 68 degrees. And they spawned successfully. And I actually watched them spawn for several hours, so it was pretty cool. But 74 degrees on the top side. In the summertime, it'll get a little bit warmer, but at that point in time, they'll stop spawning. So pretty much for spawning, you want to keep them in cooler water. And then you can throw some floating plants in there. The males, once they're holding, they kind of like to want to go off and kind of hide somewhere. And like I said, since Gary came out with these Zoomed floating logs about 10 or 12 years ago, these things have been just amazing. And here you can see male Betta sitting in the Betta log. He's done spawning, but the female's still looking for another male, which is a bad mix for the poor male. Even with Betta macrostoma, I actually, when I spawned them, I had 18 of them in one tank. And I did that not really knowing what I was doing at the time, but I had, there used to be a group called the North American Fish Breeders Guild, and I made a lot of friends in there, and we would trade fish. And I met a guy from Japan that had family in Hawaii, and he would come over to Hawaii, and we would trade fish through the post office. And I would send it, he loved live bears, and he knew that I loved little tetras and anabantoids and stuff like that. So one time he contacted me and said, I've got a bunch of Betta macrostoma, would you want some? And I was like, well, how much are they? And he says, well, you have those Carl Hubsey of Stewart I really want those. So if you send me a dozen of those, I'll send you a dozen macrostoma. Well, I don't know, I guess so, okay. So I went ahead and we made the trade, and I actually wound up with 18 macrostoma. And I put them in a 30 breeder, and the first time there was a spawn, I was so careful. I very carefully took a bowl and got the male and took him out of the tank, moved him to another tank, and I was trying so hard to make sure that they didn't, nobody bothered him or anything like that. I was really excited, and when it came time after he released the fry and I went to put it back into the tank, I noticed that there were little baby ones, about 1 inch long, already in there. They've been spawning already, and I didn't notice it. And the adults just completely did not pay attention to them. And at one point, I had like over 500 of them, because they just keep breeding and keep spawning. So I actually had to separate the males and females, because I had nowhere to go with all of them. And the wholesalers didn't want them anymore. Nobody wanted them. I was selling them on Aquabid, and I was only getting $5 a piece for them, because I was just selling so many of them, and the other Betta breeders were giving me trouble because they sell for $200 a pair, and they were wanting me to sell at that price. I was like, no, I need the tank. I gotta get rid of these guys. So. But anyway, that just kind of gives you an idea. That happens quite a lot with the different Mouthbrooders, that they'll spawn, they'll have fry in the tank, and you won't even know it until you start seeing fish that are already a ½ inch or more long. I like to give the males some caves. If they are holding and they don't have a floating Betta log, or even if they do, sometimes they like to go down to the bottom of the tank, and so they have a few caves for them down there that they can go and not be bothered. And then when you're trying to get them to spawn, what I found is that the females like an area that's kind of enclosed and protected on three sides. And what I found they really like are flower pots that are tipped over. So I use 4-inch flower pots for the smaller ones, and I use 6-inch flower pots for the bigger ones. And the females will actually choose their little flower pots, so you want to make sure there's enough flower pots so that there's enough for every female in there, otherwise you will wind up with a dead female. And they'll, when they're ready to spawn, they'll actually coax the males and get them to come down to their flower pot. And you'll see the two of them, they'll do their little thing. And what they do is they'll do the spawning embrace, and the male forms a cup with his anal fins, and the female will actually lay her eggs on that little cup. And then she will go down, and the male, like in the bubble nesters, the female kind of just is like in a little trance for a minute or so after they lay a group of eggs. And with the mouthbrooders, the male just kind of hangs there. The female actually goes down and she'll pick up the eggs off of the male's anal fin. And then she goes and she starts spitting them at the male. And he'll catch them, and he'll keep catching them until he can't take any more in his mouth. And she'll spit him a few more times and it'll just bounce off of his nose. And then she'll just go over and just start banging on him and chase him out of there. And then if there's another male in the tank, she'll go court that male, bring him down, and start spawning with him. Like I said, I had a particular female, a female Betta NSA, that spawned with 4 different males in one spawning session. So a lot of times it's a really good idea if you want to, especially if you want to try to breed the fish, to have a group so that they've got a group interaction. And then I already talked about the floating log. The other thing that people always talk about is sexing the bettas. And Gary helped me set up this photo. This was back when we were doing slides, I think, and we converted these over. This is a pair of Betta pugnacks that I had. And the cool thing about these guys was that every time Gary called me and said, hey, we've got so-and-so in town, can I come over and see your fish room? I would do a water change on the tank. And they would come over and they would see the male Betta pugnacks, their head turns blue, bright blue when they're holding. And I would have 3 or 4 males in that tank, and they would all be holding because I did that water change, and they would get all excited and spawn. So every time the people came over, oh, that's a great breeder. He had all these bettas holding eggs and stuff like that. It was just a fish that's what they do every time. The way to tell these guys apart, obviously, this is the female here. She's a little bit heavier body. Coloration's a little bit lighter. You can't see it quite in this one, but the female's got more of a rounded caudal, the male's got a pointed caudal. The male has a big, long dorsal fin, like I talked about before. They only hold the dorsal erect when they're kind of either showing off for other males or showing off for the female. Otherwise, they carry it laying down on their back, and it usually lays all the way back past the beginning of the caudal fin. Females have this short little fin, and they carry it erect all the time. And then also the pelvic fins are a lot longer in the male than they are in the female. But what I found, and I just found this by accident when I was looking at some baby fish, when they're only like 3 weeks old, you can sex them. The males have this huge rounded head. It's a U-shaped head. It's designed for holding a lot of eggs. The females have this little pointed mouth because they don't have to do that. It's just a normal fish mouth. And you can see this when they're only, 3/4 of an inch long. And it makes it really, really easy to sex them. They've got all the other things too, but that's a really, really simple way to sex them. And then just kind of showing males getting a little bit more color in the head as he's getting ready to start courting a female or spawning. And then we'll look at some of the different species just to give you an idea of some of the different ones that are available. Then Alma marginata, that's one of the species on the list. They're a blackwater fish, but if they've been bred in the hobby for any length of time, if they're wild caught, we want to keep them in blackwater at least for a while. But if they're wild caught, or if they're tank raised fish, you can literally keep them in tap water, and they'll breed and do just fine. Alma marginata, you can see, think of the name marginata, white margin. They've got the white margin all the way around, and they're kind of like a cherry red color. Then there's Betta chinoides, which is often confused with them, which when you look at the 2 fish, they don't look anything alike. Kind of a rusty orange color. And they've only got white on the anal fin and a little bit, sometimes on the caudal fin, but most of the time they don't. And then black all the way around. But again, you These are both 2-inch little tiny bettas, really, really cool. Pretty easy to care for, pretty easy to breed. Betty, you did they? This is Gary's. I think you were like the second guy in the club to breed Mouthbrooders, weren't you?
Yeah.
And that was this one that had like 200 babies or something like that. They called these guys the ladder tail bettas, and for a long time, these guys were the only ones that were in their group by themselves. And they had these little ladder hash marks between the rays on their caudal fin. Not a very big fish. They're pretty easy to care for. And the cool thing about these guys, again, like I said, they have a lot of fry. And Betta Phelps, another one that's kind of small, about 1.5 inches long. And these guys are a little bit different than most of the bettas. Mouthbrooding bettas, the males will have a blue or a green colored head. These guys, when the males are holding, they have a yellow colored head. So throw a little bit of variety in there. Betta picta, this was actually the very first betta species that was described. So in the 70s, we had a couple of experts that were saying that, well, the mouthbrooding betta should be in one genus, what they call pseudo-betta, and bettas will be the bubble nesters, because everybody knows that all the bettas are bubble nesters. Well, Betta picta was the first species described, and it was actually described as a killifish. So, took about 100 years to straighten that out. But anyway, these guys are great little guys. This is this is the first species mouthbrooder that spawned in our club.
That looked like a little sparkling garum.
What's that?
It looked like a little sparkling garum.
Kind of. A little bit bigger than sparkling brownie, and they're a little bit more rusty colored. They don't have the little scales that
Like
shine and stuff.
in
Like
the
that.
top picture there.
But, that's a female, actually.
Oh.
So, not as colorful as the male. She doesn't have the light
Huh.
color. And then you've got, well, this is also, this kind of illustrates, you can see this little spot right here.
Yeah.
You'll see that on a lot of the bettas, and a lot of people use that to separate the betta groups, and they'll call this one of the Ocellata group. And other guys, when they start looking at it scientifically, they'll call this the picta group, the beginning of the picta group, which Betta Fox and some more of it, a couple of the not some more, Simplex and a couple other ones will be in that group. But that little spot there, as you can see in some of these other pictures later on, it really isn't a good diagnostic tool. Then we got Betta rubra. Betta rubra is actually going around in the hobby or in the club right now. You've got two different varieties. You've got one with a rounded tail that's more blue, and you've got one with a little bit of a spade tail, and that's actually the one I think most people in the club have right now. They have a fairly sharp temperament. They like to scrap a lot and fight a lot, but they don't do a lot of damage. So it's kind of like mostly for show.
Are they a mouthbrooding?
They are. See?
Oh.
Just to give you an idea, again, bettas, especially some of these mouthbrooders, are fairly precocious. This guy is only 1.5 inches long, and he's already, as you can see, got a mouthful of eggs here. He hasn't even fully colored up yet, but the female was ready, so they spawned. And I had to take him out and put him in a little, one of those little hang-on tank breeders, and took the picture here. You can actually see the eggs, how big the eggs are in this guy's mouth. Look at it. But he successfully raised the babies. Betta simplex, that's another one in the group there. It's a little bit kind of longer body, a little bit more narrow body. But again, this is one of the ones that aren't very picky about the water parameters. Same thing with Betta taeniata, except Betta taeniata gets a lot bigger. They get to be about 4 inches long. Betta forshii is one that drove me crazy for years. I had these guys in a 15-gallon tank. I did only have a pair, and I kept hoping that they would spawn. I kept feeding them live foods. I kept feeding them the insects. I tried softer water, harder water, all different kinds of things. I had them for 4 years, and they finally started spawning when they were 4 years old. And then once they started spawning, they didn't stop. They just kept going and going and going and going. So that's another little thing about the males. Once they've spawned, they're not very bright. And if they go back with the female that's ready to spawn again, they'll all of a sudden be going another 2 weeks without food. And If you let them keep doing that, they're not gonna be able to spawn anymore because they'll be dead. So you want to give them a short respite in between spawning. So those hang-on tank little containers work really well. You can put the male in that and then feed him really well for a couple days before you put him back in with the females. The Betta strelai is closely related to a Betta foreshot. Back in the old days, they always talked about, you told strelai apart from foreshot by the color of the cheek bars. Strelai had gold cheek bars, and foreshot had red cheek bars. But if you look at the tail, foreshot's got a rounded tail, and strelai has a pointed tail. And these guys also were very persnickety and waited almost 4 years before they spawned for me, and then kept going. But the cheek bar color thing isn't really very effective. Gary was taking some pictures over, and this was the male, bright red. And this male, about 20 minutes later, starting to turn gold. Same male. So that's not a really, really good way of differentiating the species. And then we talked about all the pretty little bettas. Now I talk about the last group, the big ugly bettas. I got this name from the folks at PetSmart. I was there getting crickets for my frogs, and while I was sitting there waiting, I was standing by the goldfish tanks, and I saw this thing that looked like a betta dart up from the decoration they had in there, get a mouthful of air and go back down. But it was really big. Okay. So the kid came out and gave me my crickets, and I said, "What's that betta in there?" He was like, "Oh, you don't want those. The pretty bettas are over here. Those are the big ugly bettas." And I said, "Well, that's not going to sell them very well." I said, "But those, there's more than one in there?" And he said, "Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of them in there." He lifted up the decoration, and a bunch of them in there. They were $2.99 a piece. I'll take them. So turned out it was Betta NSA that I took home with me, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. But big ugly bettas, they have a lot of personality. The really cool thing about some of these guys is they'll interact with you. They're almost like cichlids, except they're better than cichlids. So I'm looking at Pat while I'm saying that, chairman of the American Cichlid Association. So, but anyway, they will interact with you. They react to you. They recognize you, and they know that you're the person that brings them food, and they will ignore everybody else that's in the fish room. If they see you, they'll start following you around begging for food. So this guy here, that was Ted Judy's photo. Looks like he got interrupted while he was eating, looking at Ted. Hey, I'm eating. So, Betta ericensis is a gorgeous betta. It's like bright yellow. They get to be 6.5 to 7 inches long. To give you an idea how big that actually is, a dollar bill is 6 inches long. So this fish is a little bit longer than a dollar bill. That's how big they get. These guys are not too commonly available, but the male skin is really pretty, like lemon yellow to golden color over the body, and it becomes iridescent. You can't see it in this photo, but it becomes like little shiny mirror scales. It's really, really pretty. Betta belonga, this is the one that decided to go exploring my fish room, and they all wound up on the other side of the fish room when I forgot to put the lid back on the tank. So I always use this as my reminder that they're an awesome jumper. Unfortunately, they're not very common in the hobby, and I have not seen them for sale again since that time back in the 90s when Gary and I got them. Betta chini, this is the only betta, and probably one of the few anabanthoids where the female is actually bigger than the male. Most of them, the males are a good 20% bigger than the females. And these guys are a blackwater fish. There's not a whole lot of color to them, but you know, with some of the Mouthbrooding bettas, you're just getting the cool behavior and something a little bit different. Betta chloropharynx. These guys, chloropharynx means green throat, and these guys get like a metallic green throat when they're holding. Really, really interesting little bettas. Of course, again, this is my photo, so that's why you can see the eye, and that's about it. Gary always told me to focus on the eye, and it would kind of fill out that when you're not using a really good quality camera, you don't get to see the rest of the fish in focus too well. So you can see the eye, but like everything else. And then Betta dimidiata. This is another cool, fairly small betta. The males get this really, really long dorsal fin, and when they're fully grown, the dorsal fin actually goes beyond the end of the tail, which is really cool. You can see the female down here, she's just got the tiny little short dorsal fins. And then the males are kind of just doing something else that they do when they're kind of displaying for one another, which is they puff their pouch at each other. And you'll see them kind of fluff up their throat a little bit. That's why I like this over here, it kind of shows that. The Betta NSA, this is the Mouthbrooder for me that I got as the big ugly bettas. You can see while they're doing the spawning, they're actually pretty attractive. Unfortunately, beyond that, they don't have a whole lot of color to them. But you can see the male just starting to do his roll on his side to create that pouch for the eggs for the female. The macrostoma, this is, for some reason, I still don't understand why. I think it might be because everybody likes to sell these just as pairs, and you can only buy them from wholesalers as pairs. And as pairs, they're almost $200 wholesale. So they're a very expensive fish. Ed's not here tonight yet. No, I didn't think I saw him. Ed Millinger bought well, he ordered 2 pairs, and we got 3 fish. Unfortunately for him, he took them home and put them in a 130-gallon tank, but didn't have a cover on the tank, and the next morning the only female had jumped out. So, very expensive lesson to be learned there. A reminder, jumpers keep a good top on the tank. These guys, you'll hear everybody talking about when they're breeding that they're doing pairs, and that they have a lot of aggression. And when you keep them in groups, they're just not. When you keep a big group of them, like I said, I raised fry in the tank with the adults and had no problems at all. Not even torn fins or anything like that. They were really, really easy going. So I think keeping a lot of these in groups is the solution. The Betta ocellata, this is an exception. These guys, the males are aggressive. They do a lot of these little displays. This is called yawning, where the males will open their mouth. I actually had one of these guys that was almost 7 inches long, and he would come over to the front of the tank when I would be there working on the tank or something like that. And through the glass, he would be displaying at me and doing the yawning behavior. Even when he had eggs in his mouth, he would still be doing the yawning thing and displaying aggressively for me. They have a gold spot right here that only shows up in flash photos. Otherwise, you don't see it. But that'll become important again when we look at some of the other members of the group.
There used to be so many in their club, nobody has them anymore.
Well, nobody ever had them. I'll talk about that in a minute.
Oh.
Except me, I had these guys several years ago. I had the actual ocellata. But the one that was going around was not ocellata.
Oh.
Then you got Betta patoti, which is one that's been driving me crazy for years because I keep getting just males. Even when they send me a pair, it's just a pair of males. As you can see, this pair here, it's 2 males. They get this red teardrop under the eye, and you can see it when they're kind of stressed out. See, this guy's got a stripe pattern on the body. They've got that when they're normally not colored up for breeding. This guy's getting ready to spawn, so he's all excited. But they're a pretty cool fish, but so far I've had no luck with trying to breed them because I haven't been able to get females. On the other hand, I had Betta pie. Betta pie is called because it's got the Greek letter pi on its chin. And these guys, they have this huge eye for the size of their head. And these guys literally almost lived forever in that fishery. I had them in the same tank for over 10 years. And it was just, I was at the point where you guys could never give me this tank back. But they keep spawning. This is one of the fry. You can see they've even got a big, huge eye when they're really small. This guy's about 3/4 of an inch long. So, just another cool fish. There's a whole bunch of different bettas in this group called the Lobster group. And they've all got different color, or different stripe type patterns on their chins that differentiate. And then Betta pugnacks, and I already talked about how I got them to spawn and when people come over. The only thing is, when you order Betta pugnacks a lot of times from online shippers, that's not what you get. And I have ordered Betta pugnacks maybe a half dozen times in the last 10 years, and I have never gotten Betta pugnacks. One of the times I got Betta Raja, which is a pretty cool Betta in and of itself. Again, illustrated keeping them in the group. And they're kind of that rust colored Betta. They only get to be about 3 inches or so long. They're not one of the bigger Bettas like Betta Publix. Unimaculata, probably the largest species of Betta. These guys can get 7 inches or longer. And I think a 75 would actually be better for a group. I kept a small group of 4 fish in a 55-gallon tank, and 3 of the fish spent most of their time hiding. The one dominant male was always out and about and displayed. But you can see these guys again are doing their yawning display. And what's actually turning out to be, you'll find that these guys are listed with this collection location and that collection location. What's actually turning out when they look at the genetics of them, they're all different species, and not even, some of them aren't even really closely related. They're called Unimaculata, or one spot, because they got that little spot, which is kind of hard to see in this photo. But the males, remember I showed you the gold spot in Ocellata? Well, Unimaculata is blue. But again, you only see it in the flash photo. Then we got some of the new Bettas. Bettas are still coming out. Yes?
You mentioned on there to pick your tank mates carefully. What type of tank mates can you put
Big.
with those?
You don't want to keep small tank mates with them because they will eat small fish. They love cherry shrimp and other small shrimp and stuff like that. They will also sometimes even eat their fry, unlike most of the other mouthbrooders. But you want to have fairly large fish to keep with them. You don't want to keep small.
What types would you?
Medium size, like 3-inch, like Danios or Rasboras or something like that. I like using Danios a lot with my Bettas as kind of like a diddler fish in the tank. Just provides a little activity in the tank and kind of distracts them a little bit from aggression. And it works so far. It's worked a lot. The only problem is when the males go and spit their eggs. If you've got other fish in the tank, a lot of times they'll go up and start eating the eggs while the male's out eating. Kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So anyway, the new Bettas. There are Bettas that are still being found and described. I mentioned that one of the Betta species was not a freshwater fish. That's Betta mahachiensis. It's actually a brackish water fish. It lives
like 10 years ago or more.
Yeah, it lives in a coastal swamp, or what used to be a coastal swamp. It's now a supermarket, mall, and a parking lot. This fish is, they think, extinct in the wild. They're not 100% sure. So it was just described 8 or 10 years ago, and it's already disappeared from the wild. I watched a video of some guys collecting these things, and they actually would go out when the tide came, after the tide went out, those little bromeliads and stuff like that, they would actually go and collect them in the cups of the bromeliads. They would catch a male here and a female there, and they just have to stick their hand in there and pull it out. The only problem was that there were also crabs in those little things, so every once in a while you hear one of them screaming because there's a crab in there. But these guys are available in the hobby fairly frequently, and they're pretty cool. This is another one that was called the Purple Star Betta forever because the front half of their eye is kind of a purplish color. It's in the coquina group. Like I said, they remind me a lot of Betta Merlins, but because of the eye color, they're a little bit different. They're actually a little bit bigger than Merlins. But you'll see these available for sale sometimes. And then this is the reminder of why to keep the location names. I kept telling people when I saw these fish, because I had Ocellata, I knew what Ocellata looked like. These were not Ocellata. And I kept telling everybody, it's not Ocellata, call them CF Ocellata if you have to use that name, but don't use Ocellata. And when I was doing a little bit more research on them, this is actually Betta antuta, and it's from the location Sabah, which is in North Borneo. It's the old British state of North Borneo. But they have no spot on their head like Ocellata does. They do have that little tail spot, which is what everybody was thinking, well, that's what Ocellata is. Well, it's not actually true. They have different colors in the fins, and they get this big green head, even when they're not holding eggs. The other difference is Betta Ocellata is a fry predator. These guys, you can have fry growing up in the tank all over the place with them. They're really, really easy to breed. And then every once in a while, new bettas will show up. This is Betta species Poodoo. This guy's unhappy because he's covered with velvet. Unfortunately, that whole group that I got, they were just covered with velvet, and they didn't recover. Most of them were almost dead when I got them. But you can see, they're all covered with tiny, tiny little dots. I learned from these guys, I do this now with most of the Anabantoids and blackwater fish. I give them a saltwater bath when I first get them, if they're wild caught. And I'll do that for just a couple of minutes until they start looking stressed. But that's usually enough to knock out anything like velvet. And then after that, I don't have any problems with them. And I use that with licorice gouramis and all different kinds of gouramis. And then they're still describing bettas. These Betta Nuluhan was just described in the end of 2020. It's another little mouthbrooder. It's in the Betta NSA group. This one you can see a little bit better the tail. That's why they call them the ladder tail, because those look like little step ladders. So, thank you all. If anybody has any questions. Steve and I were kind of talking about this, and I've got a list here of some bettas that are available, also